Hello, this is Corey. Before we go to today's episode, I have some exciting news I want to share with you. Think about it on a scale from 1 to 10. How important is it for you to get this next year right? For many leaders, the answer is they can't afford to miss the mark in 2021. Because of the impact 2020 had on their business, their personal life, or their home life, they can't afford to miss that mark in 2021. So in light of all the tools that we already have at our fingertips, what else can we do to ensure success? We have found that one of the biggest blind spots of helping leaders and organizations reach their full potential is misaligned or mismanaged priorities. For example, when that CEO says it's all about the people and culture, but yet all they're ever talking about is profit. Or when that business leader talks about working at a healthy pace, but yet their expectation is you work 24/7. When you have misaligned priorities, your best leaders leave. This is why we're excited to announce the Prioritize Leader Academy. We recently launched this academy in Cincinnati, and due to the early success, we want to take this virtually to impact leaders outside of Cincinnati. This mastermind will bring together a few key components. The first one is content. This 12-month program will be centered around the Prioritize Leader framework. This is a proven framework that we've used for years with leaders and organizations. Second is community. We all know we don't want to be the smartest person in the room. And so this mastermind will surround you with other leaders that you can learn from. The third component is coaching. In between our mastermind sessions, there will be one-on-one coaching to help you implement the learnings into your personal and professional life. And the last component is this will be faith-centric. We will be bringing faith and scripture into our meetings, into our content and conversations to make sure that we are all Christ-centered leaders going forward. So if you are looking for accountability, outside perspective, and this sounds like it will help you reach your personal and professional goals, then the Prioritize Leader Academy is for you. We launch in April. We've got limited capacity. So visit CoreyMCarlson.com/Prioritize Leader Academy to learn more, as well as some upcoming free webinars that we will be having to do any Q&A to help answer any questions that you may have for this. So thank you for listening on to today's episode.
Welcome to the Win at Home First podcast. I'm your host, Corey Carlson. This podcast is where we talk about how successful business leaders win, not only at work, but also at home. On this podcast, we'll go behind the scenes with great leaders to hear stories of how they win. Thank you for listening, and on to today's episode.
Hello, this is Corey Carlson. You're listening to the Win at Home First podcast. Today, I'm excited to have Ross Cully on our episode today. He is the CEO of the Harvest Group, which is a very neat company. They represent about every cool brand out there, that getting them on the shelves of Kroger, Walmart, now even Target. And so very neat company, but more importantly, he's even a man of high character from the standpoint of incorporating God in the vision statement, which we'll talk about later. He's married, has 4 kids, and just a very strong man in his faith. And so he's winning at work and winning at home. So Ross, awesome to have you on here today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Corey, thanks for having me on.
So to kick things off, what is that key trait that leaders need to have in order to win at work and at home?
Yeah, there's so many that are key, but I think one that is top of my mind and heart as I've journeyed here recently is just self-awareness. And so when you think about all of us, we've got strengths and we have weaknesses. And fortunately, we don't always see those clearly at home or at work. And so I've just found that some of the most effective leaders inside our business and then effective leaders in my life that I see them kind of navigate their home life, they're self-aware of what they're good at. They're self-aware of their weaknesses. And I think once you have that, then you can build a plan to kind of capitalize on those or address them. And so it's something that I'm trying to grow in a lot right now.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. At work, self-awareness, we can do a lot of personality tests, or we have a good sense of competencies. What about at home? When you're at home, how are you aware of some of maybe how you show up in the room, or how you maybe command a presence with your kids or with your spouse around just by you walking in the room? How are you improving your self-awareness at home?
Yeah, thankfully, similar to Harvest Group, in the Cully household, we have built a great culture of feedback. And so I get some good feedback from Kate, my wife, and even my kids, unsolicited feedback. But then I also really try to solicit feedback from them. And so when I take my kids out on, some time, just one-on-one with us, a question that a friend of mine, taught me to ask was like, hey, how can I be a better dad? And so asking them that question, even, you learn some of this at work, when you give feedback with somebody, sometimes you circle back and say like, hey, how did that interaction go? Anything I could do different next time? How did it feel like to you? So asking some of those questions of our kids. And then certainly, for Kate and I, we've tried to build some rhythms into our year where I intentionally am asking her a host of questions about how I'm doing. So that's helpful. Being in community and just, hearing how friends are doing it. I think builds self-awareness, listening to great content like you're putting out, reading great books like you've published also helps build that awareness.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that about the podcast and the book. I know when I ask my kids, hey, how can I be a better dad? One thing that they almost always say is almost like dial down the intensity of coaching, of almost like pushing them for improvement, which I tend to do. And most of the time it's, hey, just hang out. Like just be a dad and not necessarily coach. I'm sure it's probably similar in your house as well, right?
It is. Yeah. I think, you put a framework out there in your book around parenting that talks about, do kids end up spoiled if they're, loved but not challenged, or foot soldiers if you're only challenging them and not encouraging and loving them. And I think if I'm honest, I toggle between those two and struggle to balance that. And so Kate at times will be like, you get to be the fun parent, taking the kids out for donuts. And so like at times like I'll lean into that, right, and not want to be so intense or always coaching and challenging. But then I think, when I talk to my kids about how I can improve, a lot of times it's, man, could you dial that down? Could that have been a shorter conversation, Dad?
Right. No, exactly. Because I more high challenge, because it is, have you read today, kids? Are you doing devotion? What is your vision for your life? I mean, it could get, sometimes I forget to take the coaching hat off. So, and I'm sure with you being CEO, you forget to take even that leadership hat off, and sometimes it's just going and playing and having a good time.
Absolutely.
I remember when we were together when I was in Northwest Arkansas, and we got a chance to actually sit down face to face, which was pretty cool. You're really good about getting away with the family, and you and Kate doing your retreats and getaways. So share a little bit of what that looks like in basically those annual retreats that you guys are doing to kind of plan, strategize, and move forward.
Yeah, I got this, this insight from a mentor, and then also some feedback from Kate. As you lead a company, you obviously do intentional things to plan the business, and so a lot of times that looks like retreats with the leadership team. And so, about the same time I got this feedback this idea from a mentor, Kate kind of came to me as very convicting. She's like, you spend all this time planning the business. What time are we spending planning for our family, which is supposed to be our priority? And it's like, oh, gut punch. You're right.
Right.
So we have taken an annual retreat for probably the last 7 to 10 years, and it's looked different every year. And so sometimes we're able to get away for multiple days and in an overnight type situation at a cabin or a hotel kind of getaway, and other times we've had newborn babies and it's been on the couch in the living room for kind of intentional couple of half days. So we've had to be flexible, but we have a couple of things that we do every year. So one is we take note of the blessings of the previous year and we write them down. Now that we have several years, the second thing we do is we just randomly pick a past year and we read them, and it just brings to mind, things that we've forgotten where we've received blessings in years past. And then we spend some time visioning forward, and it gets real practical. Like, what's our weekly rhythm? What are we involved in? Are we using, the gifts that God's given us? We talk through each of our kids, their personalities, where we see them growing and showing strengths, where are their weaknesses that we can help attend to. We go through our budget. Where are we giving charitably as we try to be good stewards. So it's been a really great touch point for us. And I think the thing we've added is our life's gotten busier, is we try to now touch base again about midway through the year, because as we know in business, things change quickly. Yep. And in a growing family our size, things change quickly too.
Yep. And just like in a business, they do change, but we have those quarterly meetings where we review again. And so in a family may not need to do it quarterly, but you're right, that mid-year, what also does just brings it to the forefront of what's going on. Even if you don't make any modifications, at least you both recalibrate, get on the same page and start moving forward again, as opposed to just maybe becoming roommates where you're two just kind of business partners raising kids.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we have school age kids. And so it's kind of a natural, like, school's kicking up. Yeah. The semester's about to begin. Guess what? I need you home on these days, on these nights, and so it just seems to naturally fit that things kind of change twice a year on that school semester schedule. So it's worked well for us. Yeah,
that's great. I know for us, that 5 Capitals framework, which we've talked about before and including the book, that's been a helpful framework for our family and for me even individually to think through, hey, how do I want to grow this quarter, this year? So yeah, that's really neat that you lived that out. What is God talking to you about right now? What are you learning and hearing from him?
Yeah. I think as I look at 2020 and just the variety of challenges that it's thrown our way, and kind of getting into that holiday season of reflecting back, the thing that I feel like I've learned the most this year is to really find my hope in a deeper way outside of this world. And, as the scriptures teach us as followers of Jesus, that our citizenship is in heaven, and there's a hope outside of this world in a new heaven and a new earth that's yet to come. And I've known that mentally. I've studied that, kind of theologically, but I think this year has really created an increase in the gap between my hope for what's to come and what we have in this current world, because there's just some of the comfort that I had, that we all had, has been taken away. And so whether that's physical health that I took for granted that now, is kind of at risk for all of us, whether it's community, even, kind of the righteousness of this world as we've looked at racial inequity. I think a lot of people look at the political process we went through and are left kind of unsatisfied, and, their biggest wishes, on all sides of the aisle didn't happen, and so there's some dissatisfaction even with just how power and authority work here on earth. So I kind of ball all that together, and maybe some idols or some comfort that I've had in my life that would have had me, I'm excited, for the life to come. I'm more excited. There's a bigger delta there.
Yeah, that's neat. Well, that word hope, you and I, it's almost like you took a peek inside my journal, and the fact of just, I've been spending a lot of time here in this last, really a couple of weeks. I mean, even Isaiah 40, where it talks about wait for the Lord, and sometimes that can be translated into have hope, for the Lord to come. And really all year, a Bible verse from Hebrews talks about God will allow the unshakable God will allow the shakeable so that the unshakable remain. And so for me, that I think I was starting to put hope in a lot of these shakeable items, whether it's the idol of a busy schedule or the revenue of my business, whatever it could be. And then for the quarantine and COVID to all basically shake those things up, really help me put my hope in what's more permanent, what is the unshakable. So you and I have been thinking some of the same words and thoughts. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. I've definitely hope has been a word for me as well. So that's neat.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sounds like we're on the same wavelength. And so, yeah, it's just brought me to, you might listen to that and say, like, oh man, like it sounds like, kind of going through the dark year, but it's actually brought about another level of worship and gratitude and thankfulness. And like you said, hope than anything. And so as the Bible ends with the prayer, come Lord Jesus, come, like I pray that with greater hope and fervency after this year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Our church has been having this big campaign right now, or just a slogan where if the story isn't good, then the story's not over. And so it's a lot of like what, you and I are talking about right here, where 2020 has been a difficult year and trying, which also means it's not over yet because it's still not good. So a lot of your hope for the future. Speaking of God and a lot of those pieces, when I did go into your office and saw right when you walk in, I mean, God is in your vision statement and right there on the wall. And I think that's so neat that you stand strong on your values, considering you have big companies that will walk through those doors. I mentioned at the very beginning, it's Kroger and Walmart and now Target, plus all these other neat brands that you represent. And I think that's a bold move. So how was that when you established your values? Did you think, I better not put that in? I mean, how did that go through? Because I do work with a lot of clients as we put together vision statements and our core values. There's always that pushback of, well, I don't want to do that. I may rub someone the wrong way. So I'd love to get your insight, and because you for 14 years, you've been having this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a big decision. And I think it certainly has the potential to be misinterpreted, in really negative ways and in unintentional ways. But for me, like, as we went through the process of founding Harvest Group, as we crafted our mission statement, the definition presented to us of a mission statement is like, why do you exist? And for us, sitting there at a kitchen table with nothing, as entrepreneurs, trying to imagine and dream about this. As people of faith, we came at that question from a place of dependence, and just at the foundational core of who we were personally. It was, we exist to serve God, to honor Him. And as we thought about including that in our business, for us individually, there was no greater level of accountability in how we went about our work, from an excellence standpoint, from an integrity standpoint, from how we treated clients, from how we treated teammates, than including that. And so it's personal to me, and so as I've weighed, kind of putting that out there and interacting with teammates and clients and folks in the community that don't necessarily share that faith, it puts pressure on us to walk in a grace-filled way, and to not engage folks that have a different worldview in an exclusive way or an exclusionary way, or in a way that would shine negative light on our faith. And so it's kind of a form of accountability. So I don't think it's required, for people of faith in business to wear that on their sleeve. And I think that companies and people play different roles throughout the world. And so we're just playing our little role, kind of as we walk through.
No, I mean, that's neat. You did say something, well, you said a few things there, but one in particular is it does raise the standards. People have a higher expectation when you put the God value in there. And I've heard, as you have, different stories of people say, you should have done this because you have God in your values, and the list goes on. I'm sure you've got some stories like that. But the other thing you mentioned is that, yes, you probably have lost a potential employee for it, or a prospect, I should say, and maybe even a client. But it's not an exclusive statement. It's very inclusive. It's really kind of on that person, how they perceive it.
Yeah, really, I think it means a variety of things, to folks that work inside Harvest Group. And so for some people that are people of faith, like it very much aligns with who they are, and it has very deep meaning as they come to work. I think other folks look at it and say, hey, this is a company that's going to strive to do things with integrity. They're probably not going to do something that conflicts with my conscience. And so I feel good, about working for a company that's going to operate like that. So yeah, so it means a variety of things. And I'm okay with that. Like, we're an inclusive company and want people to come from wherever they are in their journey.
Thank you very much for listening to today's episode. I hope you are enjoying it so far. Before we go back to the rest of this episode, I want to share with you my book, Win at Home First. Some of you have read it, so thank you very much. For others of you, you have not. And I encourage, if you're looking for a resource to help you with these times of your work is now in your home and your home is now in your work, and what this looks like. This book is being helpful to many leaders like you. Forbes magazine said it was one of 7 books everyone on your team should read. And the book is broken up into 4 different sections to help you. First is about you, understand who you are. The second is marriage and ideas and tips to help with your marriage. Third is parenting. And then last is work. So these 4 different sections to help you recalibrate during this time and to help move forward. So if you are needing additional resources, I encourage you to check out my book, Win at Home First. It is available on Amazon as well as Audible. And so on to the rest of the episode. Thank you very much.
Speaking of your company, it is obviously growing. You're now going, into Minneapolis, so you got a whole new market. So you have multiple cities. So as a CEO, a husband, a father of 4, now you're in multiple markets, very busy. How are you guarding your time, your day, to make sure not only is it, productive and fruitful, but you also are able to lead both at work and home well?
Wow, that's a big question, and one that I wrestle with quite a bit. I think a couple of tactics that have been helpful. One is blocking my calendar and blocking it for things like personal time with my family, when I'm going to leave work, when I need to be at an event. It looks like blocking time to make sure that I have the ability to think and not just respond, to emails or go to the next meeting. And so that intentionality with planning my time has been key. I think if I zoom out, I also try to, budget the nights, in a non-COVID year that I'm away from home as best I can. And so I try to be thoughtful and choiceful. I think a key strategy, at our work has been to surround myself with great leaders that are smarter than I am, in many cases better at things than I am, and be willing to give them authority and empower them to do things that otherwise I would do. And so I've been tremendously blessed with a phenomenal leadership team that I trust to empower in that way. And so that takes a lot of pressure off of that potential conflict of time. But I had a friend that said it's not work-life balance, it's work-life balancing. It's a verb, it's dynamic. And so I try to make sure that I'm paying attention to that balance. Kate makes sure that I pay attention to that. And as I tell our people, sometimes you're going to have something come up and work is going to have to win when you don't want it to.
Right.
But when that happens, you need to be intentional about figuring out how can family win during a different time, and try to get that time back and keep that balance in place.
Yeah, that awareness that you've got to recalibrate, and talking to the family in advance of, hey, this is a busy season coming up. I've got to travel to these cities, or we got a conference coming up, or whatever it is. So these are going to be busy. But on the back end, it's going to be family. I know for us, when we've looked at a heavy schedule, whether it's due to sports or dance or gymnastics, throw in my work travels as well, it's like we're doing a staycation. We're putting in the calendar to do a staycation. We'll stay in Cincinnati for that weekend in a hotel, have a lot of fun. And just having that kind of light at the end of the tunnel has been so helpful for our family.
Yes.
And so,
I think that strategy has been big for me to see that on the front end and the back end of busyness, be intentional. And so, and it's amazing how easy it can be to get a win there, and so, when I'm scheduling flights, man, if I can carve out an hour, when the kids go to school and I have to go to the airport, to just grab coffee with Kate, massive win. On the back end, if it's like, hey, you go, I want you to go away, and have an evening with friends after I've been gone for several days, or I'm going to cook dinner, 2 or 3 nights this week. It makes a big difference.
Yep, absolutely. As you've ran Harvest, we talk about those 14 years. Was there a point where you were able to release control more so to your employees or to those leaders that you spoke highly of than before? As I work with a lot of clients and they're balancing, a big point is control. Like almost where everyone thinks they're more important than they really are. If I don't do it, it won't get done right. Was there a point, almost that tipping point, or were you pretty open-handed from the beginning of releasing just the work and not having to worry about it?
Yeah, I think that tipping point was more handed to me versus something that I intentionally did. And so about 3 years ago, our company went through an ownership transition where I bought out my two business partners. And so at that point, I found myself in a new phase where I'd had two running partners to kind of share that load with, and suddenly I didn't. And so on the other side of that, it was a healthy thing for me in the sense that there was no way to have any balance in my life if I didn't execute an empowering leadership strategy. And so we already had begun that journey, but that was definitely a key point in my leadership journey that changed that for me. And so it was such a positive thing, for me to come on the other side of that and hand over, empower, trust, have leaders that were bought in, that were ready, that we had great chemistry with, that just took it and ran with it. And our business has done phenomenal ever since.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned there's a healthy side, but usually before there's health, there's not. So you must have went through that valley, the shadow of darkness there for a little bit, where you had an unhealthy season.
Yeah, for sure. As we went through that buyout transition, and as we went through growing pains leading up to that, this point in time as a leader, where you're trying to get your arms around everything, and whether it's a change in ownership or your business is growing. In our case, it was both. Mm-hmm. It prevents you from that span of control, that word that you said, being able to do that in a healthy way. And so, yeah, so I think, things that play out there is burnout, lack of balance, micromanaging, a host of unhealthy behaviors that can present themselves. And so as I went through that season of growth and that transition, it took me to a healthy place.
Mm-hmm. What's the current challenge you face right now as a leader?
Really, we just finished our annual employee survey where we solicit feedback. I'm a big believer that high-performing cultures and performers eat feedback for breakfast. We had 35,000 words of verbatim feedback. And I read every word of it. And
good for you.
And so the number one challenge, inside our organization for several years, actually listening to our team, is the rate of growth that we're going through, preserving our culture and continuing to deliver excellence for our clients with that rate of growth. And so for me as a leader, it's trying to make sure that we have, or in the scale stage, the leadership, bench strength, the processes, the right communication, lines of communication within our organization, the training, the onboarding, all of those processes that, to your point about, giving up control, that as an entrepreneur and before the scale stage, you can have your pulse in that. You can even do a lot of that. And we've just reached a new stage of doing that. And so I think for me, it's preserving that culture and the excellence that we serve our clients with managing the rate of growth that we're going through.
Oh, that's great. I think it's really neat. As a leader, you read all 35,000 words, where there's many who don't, or they delegate it. And hey, please give me a summary of the big takeaways. That just says a lot about your hands-on leadership to really get to the heart of what's going on. So it's pretty neat.
Well, it was a range of emotions, some super inspirational and encouraging words that you can't believe. You kind of wake up and you go back to the kitchen table, startup, and you're like, I can't believe someone just wrote that, about our company. On the other end of the spectrum, some gut punches that you're like, oh man, we have a big issue here that I didn't know about, or, oh wow, somebody thinks that, inside our company, like. And so, yeah, so you have to take the encouragement with the opportunities and in some of the discouragement. But for sure, as we get bigger, things like that become more important for me to stay in touch with what's going on inside our company.
That's neat. What about at home? What's the greatest challenge you face as a leader right now at home?
Oh man, there's several that are coming out of this prolonged COVID.
Hey, for all of us, right?
Yeah. So Yeah, let me tick through the top ones here. So I think for my wife, who is introverted
Mm.
and recharges alone, it is how do we make that happen in
That's
a
right.
house that's full of kids, and my kids range from 12 to 1.5, so quite the range there. So yeah, just seeking respite for
Hmm.
her. And then with my kiddos, I think I'm speaking of that age range. The challenge for me is living on both ends of the spectrum. And so when I get home from work, getting down on the carpet, playing cars, with
Right.
my little one Lachlan, and then figuring out how do I pry my eyelids open long enough to hang with my 12-year-old who wants to stay up late.
And do TikToks or something.
Yeah. So I'm just experiencing that age range, and
Hmm.
in my, just like you adjust your leadership style with different direct reports, at work, I'm trying to figure out how do I adjust my parenting style, how I intentionally have fun and connect with my kids with that age range that I've got at home.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, it's situational leadership wherever you're at, whether you're at work or at home. Different people need different motivations, and just like our kids. One thing you mentioned was rest, and I've been really working with myself as well as just clients because it's been such a hard year.
Mm-hmm.
That how are you or how are people finding intentional rest, not sit on the couch and just pound pizza and a beer, but instead that rest that's fulfilling, to your heart and really fruitful for the kingdom. So really help and encourage people, especially, just after this hard year, and what does that intentional rest look like? So yeah, that's neat that you're doing that. Ross, part of my story is where I talk about handing over my story for a greater story. Is there a moment in your life, and you may have had a few, where you just felt God was calling you into something better or different, and you had to let go, kind of loosen the reins of the story you thought you were building for Ross, and instead it had to be more open-handed?
Mm. Yeah, I think the thing that comes to mind for me is early in our marriage, God placed on my part a heart for the nations and just what God's doing around the world. And that was something that I didn't really understand, kind of, it wasn't part of my heart or my faith walk. And so there was several instances during Kate and I's engagement, our early marriage, where we traveled overseas, to various places that felt uncomfortable, that felt dangerous or hard about those trips. And there was a releasing, in that journey for us, that, hey, we don't know everything about this, but we feel like this is what we're supposed to be doing. And I think when you go through some of those challenges, some of the folks looking in on your life are you sure? What are you doing? And so we experienced a little bit of that, but there was great fruit as we just grew to love a variety of countries and cultures, and saw God work through some of those travels. And so that's an area. And then I think another area that's just more recent as we go through 2020 is just growing in awareness around racial inequity and injustice. It has been something that, as I have spent time with my friends that are people of color, is just hearing from their story, realizing blind spots that I have, words that I think mean one thing that mean another thing totally, and just concepts that I hadn't ever really dove into. And so Kate and I have spent some time this year just kind of releasing some of those those thoughts or preconceived notions, and just trying to grow in relationship with our friends of color at our church and in our community, and also just to read some different content, listen to some different things, and grow our awareness. And there's been a releasing of that, of how we viewed the world, and some uncomfortable growth.
Yeah, man, I could definitely relate to the race piece for sure, because that's been our house as well in 2020. Holly and I have had more race conversations than this year than ever. Read more books, listened to more podcasts, talked to our kids about it. I mean, so very, very similar to what you're doing, and learned a lot. And there's some parts I guess I didn't know, if you know what I mean. It's that unconscious incompetence where I just had never really dove into some stories or learned more. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting year just learning a lot of that. So it's neat that you guys have stepped up in your house as well.
Yeah, it's I think you talk about like the bigger story in the point of release. I think the decision we made to bring that conversation inside our company, I'm embarrassed to say, was a harder internal struggle for me. But we ended up doing it, and we invited some teammates that were further along their journey. Some of our teammates of color stepped up in a very courageous way just to share their story, as we went through some of the unrest that came from George Floyd. And so, but there was a point of release of like, okay, this could really be a powder keg inside our culture. But I was so proud of our company in terms of how we lived out those values. One of the most impactful team meetings we've had, just hearing people share those stories and people just growing and being open to learn more about it.
Yeah, that's neat. I know in our house, my sister-in-law is Black, and we'd never really had I'm ashamed to say, but really never had a family conversation about it. And after George Floyd, a few weeks after, I don't remember exactly when we did it, but we did a Zoom call, and had Ashley, and it was all of us and my kids, and we talked and, tried our best to kind of surface some of those things like you talked about. And it was awesome. It was a cool experience it was hard for sure, but it was just neat. Ross, what are you reading right now?
Man, I'm in a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things that's written by an entrepreneur, former CEO, now investor. I'm reading Tattooed on the Heart. It's a book about kind of the gang community inside LA and some work that a guy did there that's been pretty sweet. And then a lot of children's books at night.
That's awesome. That's very good. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I could keep asking you questions for sure, because the little time we have spent together, I've learned a lot from you. So very neat to get you to share your wisdom with the Win Home First podcast audience. So thank you. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can check us out at harvestgroup.com. And I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Ross Cully. So we'd love to connect with your audience. So thanks again for having me on, Corey.
Yeah. Well, you are welcome. Thank you.
I want to thank you for listening to my podcast, Win at Home First. I am so grateful to hear from listeners like you that this content has been helpful. So now I would love for you to pay it forward. I want to get this message in the hands of more listeners. We need leaders to be winning both at home and at work, especially during this time. So please take a minute to share this episode with somebody you think would find value in it, as well as rate and subscribe. As a thank you, please visit my website at corymcarlson.com to download a free resource that people are finding value in. Thank you very much.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.